They say revenge doesn't knock, it slips in quietly, sits at your table, and waits for you to notice. I first heard it whisper during Sunday lunch in Elderton, at my in-laws' sprawling, suffocating home on Marrow Street. The smell of overcooked lamb clung to the air, the clatter of cutlery masking every unspoken insult. My mother-in-law, Mary, was smiling too sweetly, the kind of smile that hides a blade. My brother-in-law, Robert, couldn't meet my eyes. And my husband, David, ate as if nothing in the world could interrupt his perfect, peaceful meal. Then my phone, resting on my lap, vibrated once. A text. Unknown number. Don't react. They're recording you. The words sliced through me like a cold scalpel. My jaw stayed locked in a polite smile, but inside, the air turned heavy. Recording me? Here? Why? I was no criminal, just Elizabeth, 34, a literature teacher, the perpetual outsider in a family that never forgave me for not being born into the right bloodline. Mary's contempt was an open wound I'd learned to hide. Once, over dessert, she'd said to the whole table, "Some people only marry to escape their own lives." I poured her more wine that night with steady hands while my insides collapsed, and David, predictably, had stayed silent. But this was different. Someone in the Harrow house wanted me on edge. Or maybe someone wanted to protect me. Either way, it meant there was rot under the polished veneer. I scanned the dining room without moving my head, an askew photo frame, a socket cover just slightly crooked, a ceramic figurine I'd never seen before. My instinct screamed, there was a lens hidden somewhere, waiting for me to crack. An outburst. A phrase twisted into poison. A weapon to be used when the time came for my punishment. I kept eating. Kept smiling. But inside, I began my own quiet war. If they were playing a game of entrapment, I would learn their rules, and then I would break them. I would not leave this house branded the unstable, ungrateful intruder. Later that night, when David's steady snoring filled the bedroom, the sound of a man who either carried no secrets or carried them too long to feel their weight, I slipped into his office. The door creaked like it didn't want me there. The computer screen was still glowing. A folder pulsed on the desktop, its name flashing like a dare, backup_DK. With trembling fingers, I opened it. Dozens of video files spilled into view, neatly labeled, dates, times, and room codes. Kitchen_0713_move. Bathroom_0625_move. Bedroom_0705_move. They'd been recording me for weeks. And the reason was far darker than I could have imagined. And for the first time in years, I didn't just feel humiliated. I felt the slow, satisfying burn of a thirst for justice. My stomach twisted into knots. They hadn't just stolen my privacy, they had violated it in the ugliest, most deliberate way possible. There were recordings of me in the most intimate corners of my home, in the bathroom, the bedroom, even during arguments I thought were sealed within the four walls of my marriage, or worse, between me and my son. I forced my breathing steady as I clicked open a file. There I was, sitting in the living room, phone pressed to my ear, speaking to my therapist. I don't know how much longer I can stay in this house. I feel like I'm being watched. The irony made my chest tighten with a laughter that felt dangerously close to tears. They had archived my breakdowns, my vulnerabilities, my private grief, curated like exhibits in some cruel museum of weakness. And then I saw it, the cuts. Words spliced out of order. My sentences rearranged like a script. A shirt I'd worn after that conversation appearing in a clip supposedly filmed before it. They weren't just watching me, they were rewriting me. But to what end? The answer pressed against my ribs like a knife. They wanted to prove I was unstable. Unfit. Disposable. I crept upstairs without a sound, but something fundamental in me had shifted. Yes, I was wounded. Yes, humiliation scorched through my veins. But beneath it, a colder resolve took root. This wasn't family drama anymore, this was an assault. And I refused to remain their compliant victim. If they could record, so could I. But I would do it in daylight, in ways that left no doubt. The next morning, I bought an external hard drive. Every file was copied. Backups made. Passwords changed. A new email address, unknown to anyone, received the whole archive. Then I walked into Elderton High, requested a medical leave for acute stress, and ignored the principal's raised eyebrow when he approved it. I needed distance, silence, and a strategy. For the next several days, I lived in the public library, far from their hidden lenses, combing through each video like a forensic surgeon. Matching dates, timestamps, conversations, until I found the one that hollowed me out completely. My son, sitting in his room, speaking to Mary. Word for word, soon your mommy's going to leave, and the house will be yours. My blood went cold. They weren't just erasing me, they were weaponizing my child's innocence. The pain hardened into something unbreakable. Humiliation became fuel. I saw the blueprint now: push me out, declare me unfit, maybe even accuse me of poisoning him against them. But I wouldn't give them the chance. The next day, I walked into Bryan, a law firm known for tearing apart cases of surveillance and emotional abuse. After watching the footage, my lawyer simply shook his head and muttered, "They've already dug their own grave." We began immediately, quietly. A forensic review of the footage. A protection order for my son. A full investigation into every camera hidden in that house. And the best part? Their own recordings would bury them. But I wanted more than legal justice. I wanted exposure. Masks ripped off in front of an audience. I began crafting the perfect setting: my own birthday dinner. They would come, dressed in their smug civility, never knowing that the gift would be mine, a box with a screen, playing every stolen moment they thought would destroy me. And then, just as my plan began to sharpen into something exquisite, it almost unraveled. While unpacking my son's school bag, I found a folded note wedged between his notebooks. Handwritten and signed, the cursive careful but urgent. "You need to leave. They're going to use the boy." The blood in my veins turned to ice. This wasn't paranoia anymore. This was confirmation. Someone inside their circle knew more than they dared say. And the only thing keeping me in that house now was my thirst for justice. I stared at the note for minutes, my hands trembling as if it carried an electric charge. My mind began sifting through every recent conversation, every odd glance, every shift in tone. Then I remembered. Days ago, Mary had remarked with that smug half-smile of hers, "Thomas has been so quiet lately, like he knows something he shouldn't." I'd brushed it off as another barbed comment. Now it clicked into place. They weren't just circling me, they were trying to poison the one bond they couldn't control. My son wasn't a witness in their eyes. He was leverage. I walked to his room, my pulse pounding so hard it felt like it might crack my ribs. Sitting on the edge of his bed, I asked softly, "Sweetheart, has anyone been saying strange things about Mommy?" He hesitated. His eyes darted to the door as if someone might be listening. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, "Grandma said you want to take me away and never come back." The air left my lungs. I told him it wasn't true, that I would never leave him, never hurt him. But the look in his eyes, part fear, part doubt, cut deeper than anything Mary had ever thrown at me. They were winning, slowly erasing me from his memory, rewriting me as the villain. And that I would never forgive. This wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about protecting my child from becoming their pawn. The next day, I marched into my lawyer's office and placed the note on her desk. I asked her to request an emergency clause, immediate suspension of Mary's contact with my son, citing signs of emotional manipulation. She read it once, looked up, and said, "If the judge approves, you'll have more room to move." I waited. I didn't breathe a word at home. The tension grew thick enough to taste. David started coming home earlier, rifling through drawers when he thought I wasn't looking. One night, I caught his reflection in my laptop screen as he tried to access my files. He knew something was brewing, but he had no idea it had already begun. By Friday, the court order came through, contact suspended indefinitely. I smiled, not from spite, but from relief. For the first time, I had built a wall they couldn't breach. That night, Mary stood on my front walk, shrieking, "What did you do, you ungrateful brat?" Her voice cracked the quiet like a siren. My son heard and fled to the backyard. I shut the door in her face, my hand steady. I knew her desperation was just the opening act. But what she did next still managed to jolt me. The following morning, my car sat vandalized in the driveway. Words like crazy, monster, and bad MOM were scrawled across the doors in thick white paint. My son saw it first. He froze on the sidewalk, staring at the slurs as though trying to decipher a new language. I knelt beside him. "Someone very sad must have done that," I said, the lie tasting bitter. Inside, my blood was molten. The police came, took photos, asked questions. Without street cameras, they said, proof would be difficult. Mary was counting on exactly that. What she didn't know was that I'd installed a micro camera aimed directly at the garage entrance. That night, the footage showed her, black coat, hood up, leaving her signature on my gate. When my lawyer saw it, she didn't even look at me. She just said, "Now we have everything." We added the video to the case, requesting a restraining order. It was my first clean legal strike, but the victory came laced with exhaustion. My son cried at night, asking, "Does Grandma hate me?" I said no. I lied. To shield a small heart from a truth he wasn't ready to hold. On Sunday, during lunch, David slammed his utensils down so hard the plates rattled. "You're tearing my family apart," he spat. I didn't even look up. I just kept eating. The knot in my chest tightened. David had finally shown his allegiance, and it wasn't to me. I'd always known. His silence in the face of their cruelty had been deafening for years, but now he was irritated because, for once, I wasn't quietly absorbing the blows. That afternoon, he tried to block the door as I was leaving. "You're turning him against his grandmother," he said. "That's parental alienation. You could lose him for that." I almost laughed. This from the man who'd let them record me in secret, who'd stood by while they twisted my life into a weapon. I held up the court order, the restraining measure that said otherwise. He ripped it in half like a child throwing a tantrum. I didn't flinch. There were copies, and witnesses. The breaking point came that night. I found my son in the bathroom, cheeks wet, whispering through sobs, "Daddy said you might be taken away if you don't get better soon." That was the final trespass. They had reached into his heart, planting the fear of abandonment like a seed. And I knew, if I didn't act now, they would own him before long. The truth had to come out. Not only in court, but under a brighter light. Public. Irrefutable. I returned to my birthday dinner plan. Invitations were sent to the entire Harrow clan. I told them it was a chance for reconciliation. They all accepted, their messages dripping with counterfeit warmth. I rented a quiet venue. Set up a projector. Prepared every single recording, raw, unedited, their venom preserved in full. In the week leading up to the dinner, David's behavior turned erratic. Always on the phone, murmuring into calls, pocketing his words. One evening, I found a folded paper in his jacket, a quote from a lawyer specializing in full custody battles. He was preparing to take my son. Before I could decide my next move, an unexpected request came. David's sister, Sharon, the only family member who'd stayed distant, Switzerland in human form, asked to meet me alone. We met in a dim cafe downtown, the kind where conversations dissolve into the clink of spoons. Sharon sat across from me, her fingers trembling around her cup. "Elizabeth," she said, "I can't keep this in anymore." I said nothing. They've been planning this since last year. The cameras. The videos. Everything. Cold swept through my body. She reached into her bag and pulled out a folded printout. I recognized the sender instantly, Mary. The subject line read, "Plan for if Elizabeth snaps." Inside were instructions for installing hidden cameras, suggested dates, and a script of phrases to provoke me. "You're not okay. Forgetting things again? Do you need help?" Sharon's eyes were glassy. I never agreed with it, but I was afraid of losing their help, afraid of being cut out. But this, using your son, she shook her head. "I'm done." From her purse, she slid a small flash drive toward me. "Do whatever you want with it. Just leave me out of it." My hands closed around it like it was a weapon, because that's exactly what it was. The rage inside me shifted into something colder, more precise. This wasn't just pain anymore. This was the turning point. I now had direct proof, not only of their actions, but of their intent. I took it to my lawyer. She read the email in silence, her face unreadable, then looked up. Elizabeth, you have a case for defamation, illegal surveillance, emotional abuse, and attempted judicial fraud. It was more than I'd imagined. Within 72 hours, the judge approved our new motion. Legally, David and Mary could not come near me or my son. And still, I went ahead with the dinner. I kept the invitations exactly as they were, the smiles exactly where they belonged, on my face, like a well-fitted mask. They believed they were closing in for the kill, but I was the one holding the script, and I'd already written their final act. The venue was set to deceive, flowers on each table, warm lamplight, soft music curling in the air. Peaceful, welcoming, every detail designed to disarm. Behind that facade, the projector waited like a loaded weapon. I'd hired a technician I trusted implicitly, every file prepared, queued, and locked. That morning, a final warning slid into my phone from an anonymous number: don't trust anyone today. Not even the ones who smile. For a moment, I paused. Was there another twist coming? Another trap? It didn't matter. Whatever they had planned, the damage was already set in motion, only this time, it wouldn't be mine. They arrived in their costumes of civility, rehearsed smiles, feigned warmth, the false concern of practiced liars. Mary even brought flowers. I almost laughed at the audacity. Then the lights dimmed, and the first image flickered onto the wall. Silence fell like a shroud. The opening scene was harmless, almost tender, me reading a story to my son. Then the flicker, and an audio clip, Mary's voice, steady, smug: she'll destroy herself. We just need to give her a little push. Some laughed, not yet understanding. Others shifted in their seats. Then the true cut came, side-by-side footage, their doctored versions against the originals. In one, I appeared hysterical, pacing in the dark. Beside it, the real recording, me sitting quietly, tears sliding down my face as I read my late father's farewell letter. The manipulation was grotesque. Faces in the room began to change, confusion, then unease, then something like shame. The thud came next, Mary's palm hitting the table. You set all this up, she spat. But before I could answer, her husband's voice cut through. You set it up, Mary. Not her. Every head turned. His voice cracked with something between anger and regret. I bought the first camera, but I never knew you were using the boy. You've gone too far. Mary gasped, looking wildly for an ally. None came. David moved then, storming toward the tech booth to cut the feed. But my technician was ready. He glanced at me. There's one more. I nodded. The final clip rolled. David's voice, crisp, on a call: I'll push her until she loses custody. Then we'll get the house and the kid. A woman and his family began to cry. An uncle left without a word. My son wasn't there, he was spending the weekend at a friend's house by design. I wouldn't let him watch his bloodline tear itself apart. Not yet. But it had to be done. This wasn't spectacle for applause, it was my form of justice, slow, cold, and without mercy. When the lights came back, no one would meet my eyes. Some mumbled apologies, others slipped out in silence. Mary sat frozen. Her husband stepped away from her like she was toxic. David stared at me as if unable to process the fact he'd lost. You ruined everything, he muttered. I looked him straight in the eye. No. I just took off your masks. The rest was all you. I left them there, drowning in their own poison. In the car, my heart hammered, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was release. My phone buzzed. A court notification. The judge had granted me full temporary custody, complete no contact until the next hearing. The words felt like a warm, unshakable embrace. I had one. But when I walked into my house, kicked off my shoes, and flicked on the light, I froze. On the coffee table sat a white envelope. No name. No return address. Inside, a single photograph, me, asleep. On the back, in careful, slanted handwriting. You still don't know what I'm capable of. The words were scrawled across the back of the photo in an uneven, deliberate hand. My hand shook as I stared at it. The image was fresh, my hair, the crumpled sheets, the book I'd fallen asleep reading, exactly as they'd been the night before. Someone had been inside my house. After everything I'd exposed, every court order, every lock changed, someone had crossed my threshold while I slept. The fear didn't hit all at once. It seeped in slow, venomous, like smoke filling my lungs. I checked the windows. Locked. The front door. Locked. But the back? The spare keys Mary once kept? Or worse, did David still have a way and I didn't know about? My heart pounded as I moved through the house, testing every latch, every bolt. It was the hidden cameras all over again, only now the threat wasn't just watching, it was breathing the same air as me. I called my lawyer. Her voice was sharp, controlled. Don't panic. Put the photo in a plastic bag. Take it to the police in the morning. I did exactly that. Filed a report for trespassing and stalking. The officers examined the envelope, took their notes, asked their questions. But I knew, if they could get this close, they could vanish just as easily. The next few nights, I slept with the lights on and a kitchen knife beneath my pillow. Every creak in the house made me sit upright. The exhaustion was clawing at me, but I recognized the strategy. They wanted me fragile. They wanted me to snap, to walk away from everything I'd fought for. They still didn't understand, I'd learned to turn desperation into fuel. My lawyer filed for a full perimeter restriction, house, street, surrounding blocks. This time, the judge didn't hesitate. Electronic monitoring. If anyone crossed the invisible line, I'd get an alert. It should have felt like safety. It didn't. The real warfare wasn't just physical, it was psychological, and they were masters of it. With the case still unfolding, David began rewriting his own version of events. He told his family I'd thrown him out unfairly. Posted old photos of himself with our son online, captioned with poisoned phrases, absent father. Thanks to alienation. The sympathy rolled in from strangers who didn't know the truth, and I became the target of digital stones, cruel, unstable, opportunistic. But this time, I was armored. I created an anonymous account and began releasing the truth, video by video, each with dates, context, and nothing but facts. No screaming. No insults. Just evidence. 10 views became 10,000. Then 100,000. Local news picked it up, calling it a clear case of psychological abuse and manipulation. Messages began pouring in, from women, from mothers, from sons who'd seen the same patterns in their own lives. My voice was growing. Then one quiet night, the phone rang. Unknown number. A low, metallic voice, distorted, untraceable, "You're exposing too much. And we're not the only ones watching now." The line went dead. I stood frozen, the phone pressed to my ear, the room suddenly too still. That voice wasn't Mary. It wasn't David. It was something colder. Remote. Like a watcher irritated that their game was being disturbed. My mind raced. Who else could have something to lose? Who else might want this buried? Then I saw it, the possibility that this had never been just a family war. That week, my most shared post was the video of David telling his lawyer, "I'll push her until she loses custody. Then we'll get the house and the kid." The fallout exploded. A TikTok creator dissected my story, and soon after, a message landed in my inbox. He did something similar to me years ago, but no one believed me. A spark lit in my chest. Had this all been rehearsed before? I had my lawyer dig into his public records. The answer came back like a blade, yes. He'd been named in another custody dispute years ago. The case had vanished, the woman dropped it. Fear? Exhaustion? Maybe both. I reached out to her, unsure if she'd reply. She did. We met. And when she spoke, my stomach twisted into ice. The tactics were identical. The pattern was undeniable. She'd been recorded too, discredited, isolated, cornered until she broke. In her case, he hadn't worked alone. There'd been an accomplice, a family friend, influential enough to make the evidence vanish. His name surfaced like rot through water, an old acquaintance, the senior partner at the very law firm where my husband worked. The puzzle snapped into place. He wasn't just a cruel man acting in isolation, he was protected. Shielded by a network, a quiet machinery built to silence women and shield its own. And that partner wasn't just an observer. His name threaded through my own divorce papers, clauses, contracts. He controlled most of David's assets. If I wanted to sever the serpent's head, I'd have to go beyond the family feud. I'd have to hit the only two things men like them fear losing, money and reputation. Over the next few days, I built my arsenal. The other victim gave me full permission to attach her story to my case, documents, screenshots, old recordings. Together, they formed a chain of proof that was impossible to break. My lawyer contacted the Bar Association. If we succeeded, the partner would lose his license. And David would lose his job. That would be the first strike. But there was one more, public, irreversible. The firm's charity gala was scheduled for Saturday. Both men were set to take the stage to preach about family values. I decided that would be my final arena, not with shouting, not with rage, but with evidence so stark it would strip them bare in front of their own. Then, the day before, another envelope arrived. No threats, no words, just a signed property sale contract. My home, sold 2 days earlier, in another woman's name. Rebecca. I'd never heard of her. But I knew that signature. The man who had shared my bed for years had sold my house behind my back before the judge had even ruled. It wasn't about property. It was about erasing me entirely, paving his clean new path. On Saturday morning, I dressed simply, hair tied back, no adornments. I carried one envelope, copies of everything. Recordings. Contracts. Screenshots. The partner's emails. My final weapon. The hall was full. Lawyers, sponsors, families. My ex-husband walked on stage beside the partner, their suits pressed, their hypocrisy polished to a shine. They spoke of unity. Of trust. Of values. The applause was almost insulting. I waited until they finished. Then I stood. Walked to the AV booth. Handed the technician a flash drive. When I signal, I said. I stepped onto the stage, calm enough to unnerve even myself. Took the mic, sorry to interrupt, I said evenly, but I think everyone here deserves to see the real legacy of these men. The silence was immediate. The screen lit up. First the videos, then the documents, high-definition proof of manipulation, surveillance, and fraud. David lunged toward the booth, but security intercepted him. The partner's face drained to chalk, his hand trying to hide what was already public. Some guests fled. Others stayed, phones raised, recording every frame. For long minutes, the only sound was the truth echoing off the walls. This was my revenge, no screaming, no hysteria. Just facts, razor-sharp and inescapable. When it was over, I walked off the stage without looking back. In the parking lot, my lawyer was waiting. "Congratulations," she said. "You did what no one else had the courage to do." The next day, both men were suspended from the firm. An official investigation opened. Sponsors cut ties. The fraudulent house sale was frozen under a criminal complaint. Full custody of my son was confirmed. Media requests poured in, interviews, TV appearances, panels. I declined them all. Peace didn't live in headlines. It lived in silence. In my son's steady breathing as he slept. In opening a window without scanning the street first. In no longer having to smile through poison. Sometimes revenge isn't about burning someone to the ground, it's about rebuilding yourself from the ashes they left, brick by brick, until you've created a place they can never touch again. Months later, I learned David had moved away, alone. The new woman was gone, having fled the moment she saw the accusations in black and white. Mary was sued for harassment and ordered to keep her distance. The partner lost both his license and his name, the headlines faded into a photograph of him delivering food in another state. The irony was almost too perfect. They had spent their lives trying to erase women like me, and in the end they erased themselves. But on a rainy night before bed, my phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. A picture of a house. The caption read, "You won. But you know this never really ends, right?" I froze. The address was real, a new build in a remote neighborhood. A quick search confirmed it. But it wasn't the image that unsettled me. It was the tone. No insults. No rage. Just a cold reminder, for people like them, losing isn't retreat. It's reinvention. A new way to strike. I showed it to my lawyer. She told me to update my police report, call it what it was, a possible indirect threat. The police opened an investigation. But the number was from a burner. A ghost in the system. I began avoiding nighttime errands. Doubled security at my son's school. For the first time, I thought seriously about leaving Alderton. But leaving felt like surrender. I had fought for every inch of my peace, every breath that no longer tasted of fear. Why should I hand it back? Still, I couldn't settle. The message wasn't just about me. It was about control. Power. The lingering voice that says, "I'm still here." And so the cycle didn't close, it shifted. That Saturday morning, I spotted a car parked across the street. Dark, tinted windows, no plates. It stayed for hours. Sunday, it returned. Monday, again. I called the police, but by the time they arrived, it was gone, slipping away like it had been waiting for the sirens. A new kind of torture had begun, silent, legal, just enough to keep me on the edge. I fought back the only way I could: high-definition cameras with remote monitoring, a smart alarm synced to a 24/7 security center. My son asked about the new buttons and codes. I told him it was just to protect us from the past. His school implemented extra safeguards. I didn't live in panic anymore. I lived in readiness. And that, I realized, was its own kind of strength. Even wounded, even alone, I was still dangerous to them, because I knew too much, because I had pulled the mask off in front of the world. People who speak the truth are never forgotten by cowards, they are marked. I started writing everything down. At first, it was for me. Then it became for my son. A record, so if they ever tried to erase what happened, he'd hear it from my own words, not the warped versions they'd feed him. Every page was a scar turned into ink. On the last page, I wrote 3 words: "It's not over." Because I could feel it. In the dropped calls. In the deleted voicemails. In the nights when the silence was too precise to be natural. And when I finally uncovered the real name behind Rebecca, I felt the blood drain from my face. It wasn't a stranger. It was someone I knew. The name on the contract had always felt wrong. Rebecca. Too clean. Too forgettable. I dug through public records, dead-end directories, old social media scraps, until I found it. A deactivated Instagram account with only one profile picture, a black and white snapshot. Even in low resolution, my pulse spiked. I'd seen her before. I ransacked my memory until it clicked. She was in a single, dust-faded photo from one of David's old college albums, taken in the basement of Mary's house. She wasn't just there. She was on his lap. Not like a friend. Like someone who had always been there. The caption read, "My first home." It slammed into place. Rebecca wasn't new. She was a ghost from before I even existed in his life. I brought everything to my attorney. She dug deeper, confirming Rebecca had been involved in an old identity fraud case in another state. She'd changed her name years ago. No wonder she was so hard to find. She wasn't a new girlfriend, she was a long-standing contingency plan. And suddenly, Mary's cryptic line, "Some people just don't know their place," took on a new shape. Rebecca was always plan B. Waiting. Watching. Stepping in to take what she thought was hers. The house sale wasn't just a transaction, it was a declaration. A claim on territory. A victory lap before the race had even ended. I filed a motion to nullify the sale on the grounds of fraud and an undisclosed prior relationship between buyer and seller. I submitted proof of their history and her involvement in attempts to destabilize me emotionally. The court agreed. The house went under judicial review. Rebecca disappeared. So did the number that sent the last threat. But the quiet wasn't comforting, it was the kind that watches you from the treeline. My son began to smile again, to sleep soundly. I could cook with music playing. Work without my heart racing. But the tension stayed, thin and constant, like a wire pulled taut inside me. People like them don't give up, they wait for cracks. One afternoon, a voicemail appeared on my phone from a blocked number. 3 seconds long. A child's voice. My son's voice. It's her. My breath caught. It was from a private moment, inside my home. There was no way they could have gotten that without being close. Too close. I tore through every room, checking every device, every camera. Nothing. But I knew. The recording was too intimate to be fabricated. I took it to the police. They called it possibly fake. I called it what it was, a message. That night, I saw it. A faint blue glow from inside the lampshade by my bed. I approached without breathing. The light came from a pinpoint LED, barely visible, hidden in the metal frame. A micro camera aimed directly at where I slept. My knees nearly gave out. After everything, court orders, security, reports, they had found a way back in. I called the police immediately. They took the device and traced the signal. The address was painfully familiar, a rental apartment under the name Rebecca, paid for by a company tied directly to David's former law partner. The web was still intact, twisted, dirty, stubborn. But this time I wasn't asking for distance. I wanted a cell door to slam behind them. With every shred of evidence in place, my attorney filed formal charges. And for the first time, I didn't just feel like a survivor. I felt like the hunter. Stalking. Breach of a court order. Illegal surveillance. Endangering a child. The charges rolled off the judge's tongue like verdicts already decided. Within hours, a search warrant was signed. Mid-morning, police knocked on Rebecca's apartment door. When it swung open, they stepped into a nest of obsession, covert cameras, listening devices, stacks of printed photographs of me and my son, scribbled notes mapping our daily routines. It was meticulous. Disturbing. She was handcuffed on the spot. The disgraced law partner followed soon after. And David, my ex-husband, was finally named as an accomplice, accused of shielding them long after the first reports had been filed. The case exploded in the press. What began as a single woman's story of being secretly recorded had turned into a national headline, a textbook example of stalking, manipulation, and the abuse of legal systems to control and discredit. For the first time, I saw their faces on the evening news, not as powerful figures pulling strings behind the scenes, but as defendants. Stripped. Exposed. As for me, I walked away from the wreckage. I bought a small house in a quiet town, on a cul-de-sac lined with flower beds and neighbors old enough to remember everyone's name. It wasn't grand, but it was safe. Mine. My son laughs freely now, without that shadow in his eyes. He knows just enough about what we endured to understand why we guard our peace so fiercely. No more strange cars idling outside. No late-night knocks. No sleeping with a blade under my pillow. When I face my reflection these days, I don't see the hollowed-out woman who once flinched at her own front door. I see someone who stood her ground and lived to tell it. A survivor. A mother. A storm that learned to choose where it breaks. And if anyone dares to come for me again, I hope they remember. I've already fought a war against my own blood. And I left the battlefield with their crowns in my hands.